Hello again. This is a video on Chapter 13, Community Power, Land Use, and Environment. Now think about the title of this chapter. There's an awful lot of stuff in this chapter. And it makes me think that Thomas Dye, when he wrote this chapter, he was trying to cram everything else that he forgot to put in the rest of the book. Be that as it may, not all of this information is directly connected, but I can see a theme here in terms of who makes decisions in a community power, how important land is to the decision-making process in cities, and how those decisions affect the environment, the physical and political environment that cities are in. So, again, I'm going to give you some guidance on what to look at in this chapter. There's a number of things. Um, First off, you want to read thoroughly how power is distributed or affecting communities. How does power, where does it come from to make decisions? How does power to make decisions exist, and who has that power, and how is it meted out so that the communities make decisions and then act on those decisions? Where is power derived? Well, there's a couple of models of power that are talked about in the text. We have the elite model and the pluralist model. Those are two that we're going to look at. And then there's some other ways of looking at power. The elite model suggests that power is monolithic. That is, there's one group of leaders who somehow at the very top of the pyramid make decisions for everybody else. And oftentimes, that elite group at the top may not be the government officials. It might be a set of land barons, or it could be a group of leaders in the Rotary who all own manufacturing plants. It could be a general group of people who all they all own houses in the same area of a neighborhood, and they're very wealthy, and so they're making decisions and influencing others to make decisions on their behalf. The pluralist model, on the other hand, power is in the hands of leaders of various groups. This is referred to as polycentric power, where you may have a very powerful religious organization, a very powerful police organization, a very powerful community council, maybe a librarian organization, maybe a Rotary, and there are leaders at the top of each group that are very powerful. And depending upon the issue, if the issue has to do with, let's say roads and streets, the powerful people who are involved with land use and on city council who run the roads and streets, they would be most influencing in that area because that's the area that they're involved in. Or if, a couple months goes by and now something comes up regarding libraries and use of the internet, maybe all of a sudden the librarian association becomes very powerful and can influence decision making in town council. So the pluralist model suggests different groups are powerful at different times. The monolithic elite model suggests that there's maybe one powerful group, or maybe two, that are powerful across a longer period of time. There are several studies that are invoked here in this chapter. One by Robert Lind of Muncie, Indiana, that study, and then there's the Floyd Hunter study of Atlanta. You should take a good look at these and be aware of how they were carried out and what the results of those studies were. There are several other models of community power and how you evaluate it. There are the economic power model, the political power model, the sociological power model, the systemic power model. Take a look at these. They're in the text. I'm sure the continuous test will ask a few questions about it. But they're simply approaches to thinking through how power is in the hands of somebody at some time for some particular reason and can influence the decision-making and the law-making processes of a city. There are other terms that the text uses, like restricted growthers, GROWTHERS, on page 441. These are individuals who are very protective of what they would call smart growth. And if you read the chapter carefully, you'll notice restricted growthers are really people who don't want a lot of growth, and they're trying to restrict it by using legal arguments, environmental arguments, population control arguments, so that they can maintain the city the way it is. They would argue that they are very conscientious about the environment, about traffic, about land ownership and so on, and doing very good job. They're doing a very good deed, excuse me, for the city. I don't know that all people would argue that restricted growthers are all that positive in their intentions. So take a look at those, and be aware of the fact that urban growth management is something that's sort of a new field in political science and administration. Urban growth management, urban planning, economic development, economic planning. These are all great jobs to have, by the way. If at some point, and I mentioned this earlier in our study, I'm working on a political science degree for LMU, and if that gets passed, and we can tack onto that a public administration minor, these are great degrees for people to get into the public sector and how the public sector operates. So, in terms of economic development, urban planning, and so on. And excuse me, because land is very important and very valuable as we understand it in its existence in urban areas. Planning and zoning is very important. There's a whole discussion in the text about comprehensive planning. Planning is a lot more like, it's like land use. Land is sort of at the base of importance. It's very important, and it's very important in terms of its expense and who owns it and how it's operated, and how the city council agrees to allow it to be operated. So we have zoning, which is very important in cities, and zoning laws divide a community into districts: industrial, residential, commercial, single dwelling, multi-dwelling. There's all sorts of ways of dividing up the city, but we certainly don't want a manufacturing plant right next to a very large high-rise apartment building because of the belching of smoke and environmental concerns. We zone so that similar land use happens in similar areas around the city. That's a whole discussion in the text that you'll want to look at and become aware of. There's also a lot of planning that goes on in practice and in reality to make sure that if we do have mixed land use in the city, that those mixtures are properly laid out and thought through. Because if you build a manufacturing plant, well, where's the electricity going to come from? Where is the water going to come from? Is the sewer system going to be able to handle whatever it is that industrial plant is going to, its garbage output, its sewage output? Is there any radiological or chemical issues that have to be thought out and planned for? How will that manufacturing plant get its product to the people or to the market? Are the roads sufficient? Is there a necessity for new airline capacity, truck capacity, and so on? All of these are very important planning processes. They're planning variables that have to go into the process of planning. There are some constitutional concerns with how land is used and how city councils make decisions about the utilitarianism of the urban district. Excuse me. If you've heard the term eminent domain, which means that cities can basically, and city councils can basically take land for whatever their use is. And a lot of times you hear about a new major highway going through a city area, and where does it get placed? It gets placed in the neighborhoods where people are too poor and maybe not smart enough or not grouped together enough or not strong enough to go to city council and fight the problem, fight the matter. So, this huge change in land use happens. A major highway gets sent through it, and what happens? Neighborhoods are decimated. People who lived in those neighborhoods for many, many years, several generations, they're gone. They have to leave. They have to go somewhere else. And where do they go? They go to other neighborhoods, and since they're poor, they make other neighborhoods poor. So there are constitutional concerns about the idea of eminent domain. There's concerns about health, use of land. Is it privately? Can government just use private land any time it wants? What about compensation? What about how it looks, beautification, growth? All sorts of issues come up that the text brings to mind as you read through it with regard to community development and restoration. Urban renewal is another area of discussion that you'll notice that came about in the 70s. Urban renewal and community development block grants. There were grants handed out to urban areas for all kinds of purposes, for community development, enterprise zones, for new sewage systems, for electrification, for communities to beautify, all kinds of reasons. And, were those governmental grants purposeful, and did they help in some way? That's what the text talks about. Then you'll see in the 70s and 80s the rising of CDCs, or community development corporations. They had a place in urban development, as did enterprise zones, and something called brownfields. All of these development terminology have to do with groups of people or neighborhoods gathering together to try to either change the way governments operate, stall development, or rebuild past development. The author then goes into a discussion about transportation policy. You take a look at that. There are 247 million registered vehicles in America. Sometimes I think all of them are here in Knoxville, or not a whole lot in Harrogate, but they seem to be all in Knoxville at 5 o'clock when you ride down I-40. How has highway money from the national government affected local government? That's a good question. Highway money has been existent for many years, since the 1930s. The Federal Highway Act of 1956 created our interstate highway system. I mentioned I-95 earlier. There's a lot of money that states took in to either build interstate highways or help to repair and build within intrastate highways. How has the building of highways affected people who live in neighborhoods and live in urban areas? That's a good question. It affects auto insurance, seatbelt laws, helmet laws, a ton of things. Take a look at the text in terms of how policy has been affected by national government funding. And also, lastly in the chapter, the whole discussion about our environment. 1970s laws on clean air and clean water have had an impact. How we dispose of waste. Burn, bury, bear, break it out, recycle it. What do we do with waste? And how has our environment been affected by these regulations? Has it gotten better? Well, the answer is yes. We don't any longer just spew toxic waste all over the place and somebody else cleans it up. We have a Superfund group that cleans up and then charges an industry. That money is back into the fund. So it's a revolving fund that the federal government uses to clean up hazardous and toxic waste sites. Okay. Lastly in the chapter is a discussion about the Kyoto Protocols. Those are worldwide institutional requirements and regulations to try to clean up the air and clean up the water. The United States was instrumental in creating those protocols, but has failed to have them approved by our Senate and Congress. And so, what does that mean politically, internationally? We helped create these protocols, but yet we failed to sign off on them. It's kind of a weird thing. 140 nations, in the UN, all signed off, but the United States, the country that helped to create, hasn't done so. All right. Okay, that's enough there. Give me a call if you have any questions. Thank you.